The courtroom was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. My father stood at the witness stand, his voice sharp and cold, cutting through the silence like a knife. He looked straight at me when he said it. "You'll never amount to anything." He said it loud, loud enough for the judge to hear, loud enough for the reporter sitting in the back row to scribble it into her notepad, loud enough for every stranger in that room to turn and look at me like I was exactly what he described. Nothing. My name is Nathan Carter. I am 31 years old, and on that Tuesday morning, I sat at a wooden table in a civil courtroom in Atlanta with my hands flat on the surface, watching my father smile like he had already won. But something strange happened in that moment. Judge Harlow, a quiet man with silver hair and sharp eyes, looked away from my father and looked directly at me. And he smiled. Not a mocking smile, not a pitying one. It was the kind of smile that told me he already knew something the rest of the room did not. My father thought this was his moment of victory. I had a feeling it was mine. Before we continue with our story, please like and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. My father was not in that courtroom because of a crime. This was a civil lawsuit. He had filed it himself 3 months earlier, claiming I had stolen money from Carter Construction, the family business he had built over 20 years in Atlanta. He said that before I was kicked out of the family at 18, I had learned enough about the company's accounts to access them years later and quietly move money into a hidden account. He said he had proof. He said I had always been jealous of what he built, and that stealing was exactly the kind of thing someone like me would do. His lawyer was sharp and expensive. She spoke with the kind of calm confidence that made everything sound already settled. She presented documents, showed numbers, and painted me as a thief who had spent years plotting against his own family. And the worst part? The room believed it. I could feel it in the air. The reporter's pen never stopped moving. Strangers in the gallery whispered. Even the court clerk kept stealing glances at me, like I was already guilty. But at the front of the room, Judge Harlow kept glancing at a sealed file sitting flat on his desk. I had not seen that file before. My sister Diane sat directly behind my father. She was dressed in a crisp white blazer and dark slacks, the kind of outfit that said money without screaming it. Her hair was perfect. Her posture was perfect. She looked like the success story of the Carter family, which she had always been. While my father spoke, Diane shook her head slowly, like she was watching something painful and expected. She leaned toward the reporter beside her and whispered something. I could not hear it clearly, but I caught 3 words. Always been a liar. The reporter wrote it down without blinking. The gallery accepted it just as easily. Nods moved through the rows like a quiet wave. My father had raised a good daughter and a crooked son. The story wrote itself. I sat still and let it happen. For as long as I could remember, that was how it worked in my family. Diane was everything. I was the excuse. She was the reason my parents bragged at dinner tables. I was the reason they lowered their voices. But Judge Harlow did not nod. He was watching my father with a look that had nothing to do with agreement. And he had not stopped watching. My father was in the middle of a long speech about everything I had done wrong in my life when the judge raised one hand and interrupted him. The courtroom went still. Judge Harlow leaned forward slightly and asked my father a question that no one in the room seemed to expect. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice steady and low, "are you absolutely certain that your son never worked for the company? In any capacity? At any point?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then my father laughed. It was not a nervous laugh. It was the kind of laugh that said the question was too small to take seriously. "Of course not," he said. "He was useless. From the time he was a boy, he never had the discipline or the focus to contribute anything worth mentioning. I built that company. Diane helped me grow it. Nathan?" Nathan disappeared. He waved a hand like he was brushing dust off a shelf. "He has never done a single useful thing for Carter Construction. That is my sworn statement." Judge Harlow looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something down slowly, carefully, like every word mattered. The courtroom waited. Nobody spoke. My lawyer was a quiet man named Mr. Fields. He had a narrow face, a calm voice, and the kind of patience that made opposing lawyers nervous. Before we walked in, he told me to let my father talk. As much as possible. "Let him build the story," he said. "Every word he adds makes the fall harder. Now, As my father continued his testimony, Mr. Fields leaned over and whispered 3 words into my ear. "Let him talk." I nodded and looked down at the table, and the memories came without warning. I was 18, standing on the front steps of my father's house with a single bag at my feet. My father in the doorway telling me I was a disappointment, that I had no direction, that a boy who refused to follow his father's plan was no son of his. I remember Diane watching from the upstairs window, saying nothing. I remembered walking away without looking back. I remembered years of silence. No calls, no letters, no holidays, nothing from anyone. Everyone in the family thought I had simply drifted away. They assumed I had done nothing with my life. They had no idea where I had actually gone or what I had quietly built while they were not looking. My father continued speaking with the easy confidence of a man who had rehearsed his version of events so many times that it felt like truth. He told the court that I had spent the last decade doing nothing of substance, that I had drifted from city to city, that I had no stable job, no serious career, no real accomplishments to speak of. He called me a ghost. He said the fact that nobody could verify my whereabouts during certain key periods was proof enough that I was hiding something. The reporter in the back row was writing quickly now. That was when Mr. Fields reached under the table and pulled out a single printed document. He did not announce it. He did not make a speech. He simply stood, walked to the front, and placed it quietly on the judge's bench. Judge Harlow picked it up without hurry. He read it from top to bottom. The courtroom was completely silent. Then, for the second time that morning, the judge smiled. My father noticed. His lawyer noticed. The confident tilt of his shoulders shifted by just a fraction, because whatever was written on that document had clearly changed the temperature in the room. And my father had absolutely no idea what it said. My father's lawyer reached for a copy of the document and began scanning it. Within seconds, her expression changed. She looked up at me with something entirely different from the cool certainty she had worn all morning. She looked confused. "You're a financial investigator?" she said. The courtroom murmured. Heads turned. The reporter stopped writing for a moment and looked up. My father blinked. He stared at the document in her hand, then back at me, as if trying to match the person he remembered with the title on that page. Then he laughed again. It was shorter this time, and thinner. "Big deal," he said. "Anybody can lie on a resume. Nathan has been telling stories his whole life. That paper proves nothing. He probably printed it himself." The murmuring continued, and then Judge Harlow spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply said, in the same calm and even tone he had used all morning, "Not when the government signs it." Everything stopped. The murmuring died instantly. My father's lawyer slowly lowered the document. My father's mouth opened slightly. And for the first time since he had walked into that courtroom looking like he owned it, the certainty on his face began to crack. What my father had failed to understand was something very simple. When you file a lawsuit and make financial accusations, you invite the court to look at the numbers. And when the court looks at the numbers inside a company the size of Carter Construction, they do not just glance. They audit. My father had been so focused on attacking me that he never stopped to think about what a full financial review of his own company might uncover. Judge Harlow had quietly approved the audit request the same week the case was filed. It had been running in the background for 2 months without my father's legal team fully realizing how deep it had gone. Now, the first results were sitting in a sealed file on the judge's desk. Judge Harlow looked at my father directly. His voice was even and unhurried. "Mr. Carter," he said, "before we continue, I want to give you an opportunity to reconsider the direction of your testimony." He paused. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" My father glanced at his lawyer. She gave a small, uncertain nod. He straightened his tie and lifted his chin. "Absolutely," he said. "I have nothing to hide." Judge Harlow looked at him for one long moment. Then he opened the sealed file. The file was not from my lawyer. There was no stamp from Mr. Fields' office. The cover sheet bore the seal of a federal investigations unit, and the date showed it had been compiled over the past 8 weeks. My father leaned forward, trying to read it from across the room. He could not, but the judge could, and for several seconds, the only sound in the courtroom was the soft rustle of pages turning. Then Judge Harlow stopped on one specific page. He read one line out loud. Suspicious financial transfers from Carter Construction. Total amount under review. Approximately $4.3 million. The murmuring that followed was louder than anything that had come before it. My father's face went pale. Not the pale of embarrassment. The pale of someone who has just stepped onto ice and realized it was thinner than expected. He looked at his lawyer. She was staring at the judge. Across the aisle, I sat completely still. I had known this moment was coming. I had not known exactly when, but I had spent enough years on fraud cases to recognize the point in a hearing when the ground shifts beneath someone's feet. That point had arrived, and then I noticed something. Diane had stopped smiling. Up until that moment, my sister had been watching the proceedings with the steady composure of someone who had practiced her role carefully. She had sat with her back straight. She had kept her expression neutral, except for the moments when she shook her head to signal disappointment in me. She had looked exactly like what she wanted everyone to see. A concerned family member, a loyal daughter, a reliable businesswoman. But when Judge Harlow read that number out loud, something shifted behind her eyes. It was subtle. Most people in the room probably missed it. I did not. Judge Harlow set the page down and looked toward the gallery. Ms. Carter, he said calmly, you are listed as co-signatory on several of the financial accounts referenced in this report. Diane straightened in her seat. As someone with an active role in company operations, the judge continued, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. The room was very still. Did you personally approve the transfers described in this document? There was a pause that lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Diane's jaw tightened. Her hands pressed flat against her thighs. And then she said yes. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, no one moved. Then my father's head snapped toward her. He stared at his daughter the way a man stares at a wall he thought was solid when it suddenly starts to crack. Before Judge Harlow could respond, my father turned back to the court and his voice rose sharply. He hacked the accounts, he said, pointing at me. Whatever those documents show, Nathan got into the system remotely. He manipulated those records. He is the one who moved the money, not Diane. The courtroom buzzed again. The reporter's hand flew across her notepad. I sat still. Mr. Fields placed one hand gently on my arm and shook his head. Not yet. Judge Harlow waited for the room to quiet. Then he looked at my father with the patient expression of someone who had already read the ending. Mr. Carter, he said, you are claiming that your son accessed and changed financial records inside the company's systems remotely. Yes, my father said firmly. Judge Harlow nodded once. From where? He asked. It was a simple question. 2 words. My father opened his mouth, then closed it, because he realized he did not have an answer. And Mr. Fields was already reaching for another document. Mr. Fields placed the second document on the judge's bench without a word. Judge Harlow reviewed it carefully. His expression did not change, but his eyes moved with the focused precision of someone confirming something they already suspected. Then he spoke. According to this record, he said, Nathan Carter has been employed for the past 5 years as a field analyst within the Federal Office of Financial Crimes. He looked up. He has been working inside a federal fraud investigation unit with government clearance and continuous oversight. The murmuring shifted from confusion to something quieter and more serious. My father went rigid. That means Judge Harlow continued. Every login, every transfer, every action within any financial system during those 5 years was logged, monitored, and documented by the federal government. He paused. Nathan Carter could not have accessed or changed a private company's accounts without immediate detection by his own agency. He set the document down. In other words, Mr. Carter, your son has an alibi. It is not a personal account of his whereabouts. He looked at my father one last time. It is a federal employment record. The room was completely silent. Then someone said quietly what everyone was already thinking. So who took the money? Judge Harlow held up one hand to quiet the room. He spoke slowly with the kind of precision that made every word feel like a door closing. Given the evidence now before this court, he said, and given that the lawsuit filed by Mr. Warren Carter has directly prompted a financial audit of Carter Construction, I am pausing these proceedings to allow for a full court-authorized review of the company's accounts. My father's lawyer rose from her seat. Your Honor, my client objects. The objection is noted, Judge Harlow said calmly. The review will proceed. He slid a sheet to the clerk. The first summary figures from the federal audit have already been submitted to this court. The numbers are significant. He read the figure out loud without emotion. Approximately $4.3 million is unaccounted for in Carter Construction's records over a period of 6 years. My father sat down slowly. Not because anyone asked him to, because his legs seemed to give way. 6 years. That covered the exact period I had been completely absent from the family. There was no possible way I could be connected to those funds. My father looked like he was beginning to understand that, and the understanding was costing him something enormous. The reporter in the back had stopped taking notes. She was watching my father now with a different expression than the one she had worn when she arrived. She had come in with the story already written. A disgraced son, a wronged father, a family torn apart. Now, she was watching a man who could not find solid ground. She leaned forward and spoke clearly enough for the courtroom to hear. Mr. Carter, where did the money go? My father's lawyer moved to object, but the judge let the question hang. My father turned toward the reporter slowly. His mouth opened, but instead of the calm authority he had carried into that room, what came out was something thin and uncertain. The accounts were managed by... He stopped. He looked at Diane. Diane was staring at the floor. The accounts were being properly overseen, he said carefully, choosing every word like a man walking through a room he no longer recognized. Judge Harlow looked down at the next page in the file. His eyebrow lifted slightly. It was a small movement, barely visible, but Mr. Fields saw it, and so did I, because the money trail did not stop where my father expected. It led somewhere else entirely. Judge Harlow set the page down and addressed the courtroom directly. Federal auditors have identified an offshore account that received a series of transfers from Carter Construction over a span of 4 years, he said. The transfers were structured to fall beneath standard reporting thresholds. The total amounts to approximately $2.1 million. He paused. The account was opened 7 years ago. My father was leaning forward, hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. I could see him working through it. He was calculating, assuming, preparing himself for the next name to be read. He assumed it would be mine. The registered account holder, Judge Harlow said, his voice unchanged, is Diane Carter. The courtroom erupted, not loudly, not with shouting, but with the specific kind of noise that fills a room when something everyone thought they understood turns out to be completely wrong. My father's hands released the stand. He turned and stared at his daughter. Diane did not look back at him. She sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere between the floor and the wall. Her posture had not collapsed, but the composure behind it had. For the first time that morning, she looked like someone who had run out of road. My father's voice broke in a way I had never heard before. He had always been a control man. Even in anger, he kept his words sharp and precise. He never stumbled. He never lost the thread. But when he looked at Diane and said her name, it came out ragged. Diane. She did not respond. You told me the company was fine, he said. You told me every quarter. You showed me the reports. You said the accounts were growing. Diane pressed her lips together. It was supposed to be temporary, she said finally. Her voice was quiet but steady. Underneath it, though, something was unraveling fast. The company was losing money faster than the numbers showed. I needed to cover the shortfall. I planned to put it back. $2 million, my father said. You plan to put back $2 million. Things got out of hand, she said. Things got out of hand. He repeated her words like they were in a language he was trying to translate. Judge Harlow waited. The courtroom was so still that I could hear the ventilation system above us. Then the judge spoke quietly. Ms. Carter, the audit has uncovered additional concerns beyond the offshore account. He turned a page in the file, and the court is not finished reading. Judge Harlow's voice remained steady as he continued. The missing funds were not simply transferred offshore, he said. According to the federal audit, a portion was used as collateral for a series of private loans. These loans were not disclosed in the company's financial statements. He set the page down. Carter Construction is currently carrying hidden debt of approximately $3.8 million. The creditors are not registered commercial lenders. The loan terms are irregular, and the agreements were signed without the knowledge or approval of the company's primary owner. My father's face changed again. This time it was not confusion or betrayal. It was something older and heavier. He looked like a man told that the house he built with his own hands was sitting on a broken foundation, that everything he had secured over 20 years was shakier than he ever imagined. Diane sat with her hands folded in her lap. She did not deny it. She did not speak at all. My father turned away from her slowly and stared at the wall. Mr. Fields placed one hand flat on the table between us. We both knew what was coming next, because the loans led directly to another question, and that question was going to change everything. Judge Harlow addressed my father directly. Mr. Carter, the loan documents submitted as part of this audit bear signatures. Several appear on agreements that authorize the transfer of company assets as collateral for these undisclosed loans. He slid a sheet toward the clerk, who carried it to the witness stand. My father looked at it. His expression became unreadable. "Are those your signatures?" the judge asked. My father's jaw moved slightly. "They look like mine," he said slowly, "but I do not remember signing these. I did not authorize any private loans. I had no knowledge of this collateral arrangement." Judge Harlow nodded. "You had no knowledge," he repeated. "None," my father said firmly. A long pause followed, and in that pause, I watched my sister's body language change. Until that moment, she had managed herself carefully. Small, controlled movements, measured breathing, the practiced stillness of someone keeping a very large secret. But when my father said he had not signed those documents, something shifted behind her eyes. Not guilt, not exactly. More like the slow realization that the one explanation she had been counting on to protect herself had just been removed. My father had not signed willingly. He had not signed at all. Judge Harlow folded his hands on the bench. "The federal audit has flagged multiple signatures on these loan authorization documents," he said. "When compared against verified samples of Mr. Warren Carter's signature collected during standard legal proceedings, the forensic review indicates that the signatures in question are not genuine." He looked at the courtroom. "They are forgeries." The room went absolutely still. Not the murmuring stillness of confusion. The deep, airless stillness of a room where something enormous and final has just been said out loud. My father turned to look at Diane. She was shaking. Not visibly, not in a way that moved her shoulders or showed in her hands. But I could see it in the way she held herself. The kind of trembling that lives just beneath the surface when a person realizes there is nowhere left to go. Judge Harlow removed his glasses and set them carefully on the bench. "Ms. Diane Carter," he said, "you are currently listed as the individual with full signatory access to Carter Construction's administrative files, including the digital archive where signature samples and blank authorization forms are stored." He did not ask a question. He simply stated the fact. Then he asked her to stand. The courtroom watched her rise slowly from her seat. The silence lasted for several seconds. Diane stood with her hands at her sides. Her chin was level. Her posture still had the shape of someone in control. But it was hollow now, like a frame with nothing inside it. Judge Harlow waited. And then, under the weight of what had been laid out in that room, my sister broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. She spoke in a voice that was flat and exhausted. "The company was in trouble," she said. "We lost 2 major contracts in the same year. The accounts fell short every quarter. Dad did not know how bad it was because I kept adjusting the reports to buy time." She paused. "I took money from the offshore account to cover payroll. Then I borrowed to cover the shortfall. Then borrowed again. It kept going." A longer pause. "I needed a way out. When I realized how deep the debt had gone, I thought if the court believed Nathan had done it, the attention would shift." She looked at the floor. "So I convinced Dad that Nathan was behind all of it." My father made a sound I had never heard from him before. Something between a breath and a word that never fully formed. He had just realized he helped destroy the wrong child. My father looked at Diane like he was seeing a stranger. She was still standing, eyes down, hands clasped in front of her. "You convinced me," he said. His voice was stripped of everything. No power, no authority, just the bare sound of a man trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "You came to me with documents. You said you found the transfers. You said Nathan had to have done it. Diane said nothing. I believed you, he said. You are my daughter. I believed every word. She pressed her lips together, but did not respond. Judge Harlow let the moment settle before he spoke. For the record, Ms. Carter, are you confirming that you approached your father with fabricated evidence against your brother Nathan Carter and persuaded him to file this lawsuit intending to direct a financial audit toward Nathan rather than the company's actual accounts? Diane took one slow breath. Yes, she said quietly. The reporter in the back row was no longer writing. She was just watching. My father sat down heavily. He stared at the floor with the expression of a man who had just watched 20 years of certainty collapse into something he no longer recognized. And Judge Harlow turned to face me. Judge Harlow looked at me for a moment before he spoke. His expression was not dramatic. It was not the kind of satisfaction you might expect from someone dismantling a false accusation. It was steady, quiet, deliberate. Mr. Nathan Carter, he began, I want to be transparent with this court. When this lawsuit was first filed, your name appeared in the documentation. I recognized it. Several years ago, you were part of a federal investigative team that worked a significant fraud case in this district. He paused. Your work on that case directly contributed to the outcome of a proceeding I oversaw. The courtroom was absolutely still. When I saw your name as the defendant in a financial theft suit filed by a family member, I found that impossible to match with what I knew of your record. He folded his hands. That is why I approved the audit request the same week this case was filed. Not to find you guilty, to allow the facts to surface on their own. He looked at me with the calm certainty of someone who had known from the very first morning how this day would end. That is what that smile was, Mr. Carter. He nodded once. I already knew the truth was coming. Judge Harlow addressed the courtroom in the voice of a man closing a door. The lawsuit filed by Warren Carter against Nathan Carter is dismissed with prejudice, he said. The claims are without merit. The evidence presented by the plaintiff establishes no wrongdoing by the defendant. On the contrary, evidence uncovered in these proceedings directly clears him. My father's lawyers sat completely still. The judge continued. The financial evidence recovered through the court-authorized audit has been formally transferred to federal investigators for full review. The forged signatures, the offshore account, and the undisclosed loans will be handled through the appropriate legal channels. He looked toward the gallery. Ms. Diane Carter, you are not free to leave. Federal investigators present in this courtroom today will facilitate the next steps. Two figures stood from seats near the back of the room. They moved calmly toward Diane. She did not resist. She did not look at me as they guided her toward the side door. She did not look at our father. She walked out with the quiet resignation of someone who had known, somewhere deep down, that this moment was always going to come. The gallery watched in silence. My father remained in the witness chair, and for the first time in his life, he looked directly at me. I did not wait for him to come to me. After Mr. Fields and I finished the necessary paperwork and thanked the court, I walked into the hallway. My father was already there. He looked older than he had inside. The corridor lighting stripped away the controlled composure he had worn all morning. Without the audience, without the performance, he was just a man in a suit who could not decide what to do with his hands. He started to speak twice before any words came out. Nathan, he finally said. I waited. I was wrong. He said it plainly, not the polished kind of apology built to restore a relationship, not the kind designed to make himself feel better. Just 3 words set down between us like a weight he had carried too long. I believed the wrong person. I filed that lawsuit. I stood in that room and called you nothing in front of strangers. He exhaled slowly. I do not know if he can forgive me. I do not know if I would in your position. I looked at him for a long moment. He meant it. I could hear that. But there is a difference between meaning something and earning something. And I had already made my decision before I walked into that building. Several months passed. I moved into a new office in a federal building downtown, 12 floors up, with wide windows looking out over the city. I was now leading a financial crimes unit, a team of 7 people investigating the exact kind of hidden fraud that had nearly swallowed my father's company. The reporter who had written so fast in the back of that courtroom published her story 2 weeks after the hearing. She had rewritten it completely. She called it the invisible son. She reached out months later, asking for a follow-up. We met at a coffee shop near the building. She had one final question. Do you hate your father? I thought about the courtroom, his voice cutting through the silence, his certainty, the way he had looked at me like I was already decided. I shook my head. No, I said, I do not hate him. I spent too many years trying to prove my worth to a man who had already made up his mind. That kind of effort costs you something you do not realize you are losing until it is gone. I stopped spending it the day I walked into that building. And Judge Harlow's smile? He was not mocking me. He already knew the truth was about to win.